So Keaton, as some of you might know, threw up a review of this place rules, right? In which he just absolutely excoriated that upstanding young fellow. Really just went after him and included the allegations against him in the video. And when I saw it, actually, I listened to it washing dishes. Actually, I listened to it, and I complimented Keaton afterwards because Keaton, say what you will about Keaton, about his grooming habits, about his temperament. He's a good broadcaster. He has good flow. So I listened to it. I thought it was good, and I didn't even want to watch the movie because he told me how terrible it was. So that's not really enticing. And so I was just a little curious. So I put it on that night. And actually part of what made me curious was we got pushback from a lot of our own regulars about his take on it, which made me take it seriously because it wasn't like random trolls, just, like stands of this guy. It was like some of our people. So I was like, all right, let me take a look at it, man. Keaton's probably right, but let me see it. And I expected to watch it for 10 minutes. And I watched the whole thing straight through. And I said, Keaton may be chronologically younger, but I think he's too old for this movie. Me being horribly emotionally stunted, I totally got it. I got it right away. All right, so this is what's going on with that I feel like you didn't get. It doesn't surprise me that he started out doing French Quarter Confessions, I believe it was called, where he just walked up to random people on Bourbon Street and got them to like confess, like fucking their best friend's father and stuff like that. So he started out basically like a step above Girls Gone Wild. Now, the reason I thought the movie worked is because the country has become so degraded, so low, so depraved, so ugly, that his style is an appropriate approach to documenting the decline of the American empire. It doesn't mean he's some kind of a documentary genius. I think, Michael Moore is far more talented among many, many others. This is no Roger and me. He's the right documentarian for this moment and for that subject. And I thought there was a vision, there was a cohesion to the vision that you didn't credit. I felt like he understood what this was. Like, I didn't feel like he just threw random stuff together. I feel like he was making a movie. I feel like there was a vision there. And his vision is the whole country has just gone completely depraved. And I thought that was an appropriate approach to it. Now, something that some people felt was, inappropriate was bringing in the allegations in and tying it to the movie so much. I agree, like those two things, like you kind of had to mention it. It would have just been weird if you covered this the moment those allegations broke and didn't cover it.
Right. They were very, very fresh.
They were, like it had to be mentioned. But you did make the review about it, which would kind of be like reviewing Annie Hall by way of talking about, allegations against Woody Allen.
I don't agree I made the review about it. I mentioned it at the beginning. Well, yeah, I opened with it because it was an elephant in the room. It was an elephant in the room. I couldn't just not address it. And, look, if you like the movie, I didn't like the movie. I know there were some people who said you could have just said it's not your thing, it's not your cup of tea. You didn't, you could have acknowledged there was some subjectivity there. It's all right. That's a fair point. This reminds me a lot of that Tom Green movie. That's a name people haven't heard in a while. Tom Green, he put out that movie Freddy Got Fingered. I think that was in the late 90s.
Oh, way back. Yeah, way back.
And the movie was just so terrible.
Yeah.
And everybody hated it. But there was this contingent of Tom Green fans who insisted that no, Tom Green is a comedy genius.
Yeah.
Oh, you think it's dumb? It seems so dumb because he's such a genius.
Mm-hmm.
That's what this felt like to me. Like, oh yeah, okay, this seems like just depravity for its own sake, but that's the point. And that's what this guy is about. Okay, fine.
I looked at some of his others,
and I can objectively say, first of all, it's just not consistent with his thesis at the end, which is that the media is keeping us at each other's throats so that the rich get richer and the poor stay poor, right? You remember he says that at the end. Okay, so then why are you interviewing Alex Jones? Why aren't you interviewing any media figures? Or why aren't you showing footage? Like, do a Hey Dink thing. Show some MSNBC clips where they portray the deplorables as these, subhumans, and then show some Fox News clips where they dehumanize Antifa. Like, if you think the media is doing this to us, and you think that institutional power is doing this to us, then why is the whole movie a gag reel exploiting these crazy people who, in accordance with his premise, are really the victims of the situation? Why are we just supposedly laughing at their expense for 80 minutes? There's no systemic critique in the movie that backs up that statement. He just tacks it on at the very end. Oh, yeah, the media wants us divided.
I don't even necessarily agree with anything that you're saying right now. What I would say is the low approach works with the zeitgeist.
When you said you don't agree with anything I'm saying, you said
no. I just said I don't necessily disagree with anything.
Disagree. Sorry, I thought you said agree.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. He's this is not Roger and me. This is not even What Is a Woman. Whatever you think of Matt Walsh, he's talented. This is, yes, it is what you're describing. But what I'm saying is, in a sick moment like this, it's an appropriate approach to the subject. Now, I did find it interesting. And looking at some of his other stuff, yeah, I mean, he goes and he interviews people that normally wouldn't be interviewed, saying things they normally wouldn't say. So I would not watch it on the regular because the style would get old. And it's not all as serious as that. I saw one where apparently they do a Hemingway lookalike contest every year in Key West. And he was just interviewing the people who have entered into this contest. The style would get boring over time because you're right. There isn't a strong point of view. It is just kind of verite.
Right, exactly.
But on that level, it is kind of interesting. Like, I would not be a fan. But at the same time, particularly, I can see why Gen Zers who really came of age on a YouTube aesthetic, this would be a very effective way to communicate some of these subjects to them.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair enough. Like I said, your landlord's son, the mentally ill guy lives downstairs, he rubs shit on the wall, right?
Yeah.
Now, if I come downstairs in your building and I see there's shit on the wall and I say, "Oh, this is horrible," what would you say? Oh, no, that's what he does. I mean, that's what it is. That's the point. Like, yeah, it's shit on the wall. That's his medium. He smears shit on the wall. For shit on the wall, it's good. Yeah, like, it may not be smeared shit on the wall might not be your thing. That's fine, but this is what he does. So, I mean, that's what this sounds like to me. It's like, okay, fine, I granted, but it's shit on the wall. It's Girls Gone Wild. It's
It is Girls Gone Wild. I'm saying
you had to know who this guy was and be a fan of his work in order to appreciate this, which to me...
I wasn't.
Well, that's true. I guess that's true. You just kind of responded to it. But I noticed there were a lot of people who responded to that saying, well, you obviously don't know who Andrew Callaghan is. I'm like, well, I shouldn't have to. Like if you watch, nobody says, oh, I hated Goodfellas. Well, you don't know who Martin Scorsese is, so figures you didn't like it. Like, no, like if you do a good job, that shouldn't be relevant. This was perhaps more niche than I thought. I guess I thought I expected more of a narrative through line because it just seems to me like they say, this is advertised as a run up to January 6th, but it didn't have to be. Like, you did not need January 6th in the movie at all, and it would have been pretty much the same movie, right? I mean, there's really very little reason to structure it around.
No, apparently he wasn't. Well, by definition, he couldn't have known January 6th was going to happen. Well, so actually, he was just going around the country doing his thing. Mm-hmm. And then he retroactively put that footage in as something that led up to January 6th. Obviously, he wasn't planning on doing something about January 6th.
Right. That's how they packaged it after the fact.
After the fact, right. And look, also in terms of it being informative, granted, if you're not a lib, you're probably not obsessed with January 6th, such that you've been reading all the articles and watching all the documentaries. So, okay, granted, for me, I was going into it as somebody who's pretty low information about the days leading up to it. And I came away understanding it more than I did before. Like, I came away understanding that there were like several days leading into that where this tension was building on the streets. Like, I kind of vaguely knew that, but it did effectively give me a better handle on what the vibe was like and what the mood was like that a more traditional documentary might not have. Because that's what I mean by, in a way, this Girls Gone Wild approach is appropriate to the ugliness and absurdity of the whole subject. Right. I'm not saying it would work for everything, but I thought it worked for this. Like, for documenting how degraded American society has become, maybe you need a degraded documentarian to really capture that.
All right. I mean, I don't think you do, but there's no point going back and forth about that. Let's talk about the accusations. And we don't, Russell said earlier, and that's fine, he doesn't want to do a trial via YouTube, right? Like, we don't want to.
I mean, I actually have a lot to say about this philosophically rather than specifically.
All right. So we'll get into that in a second. I will toss to you in just a moment. But I want to explain why I put that bit about the accusations at the front of it. And I will admit to having probably crossed the streams more than I should. Like, I probably should have just addressed them separately. The reason I didn't, this goes back to a movie that came out in 2016 called The Birth of a Nation. Not the famous KKK movie from 100 years back, but there was a movie, if everybody recalls it, it came out at the Sundance Film Festival 2016 by a filmmaker named Nate Parker. It's called The Birth of a Nation, and it's about the Nat Turner slave uprising. And I was very excited to see that movie because this shows you what kind of education I got. I did a third grade book report on Nat Turner. I did a book report on Nat Turner in the third grade about him, killing the people at his, I mean, it's a violent story for a third grader. But I did it. And I was really excited to see the movie. And that movie made a giant splash at Sundance. Everybody was talking about it for Oscars. This is the movie of the year. This is the best film ever to hit the festival. And don't forget, this was 2016. This was pre-Me Too. Nate Parker was accused of rape by someone he went to college with after the Sundance Film Festival. And that movie basically disappeared. Like, you basically couldn't see it. They pulled all the marketing. It totally vanished. I tracked it down. I sought it out because even though, he was accused of doing this horrible thing, and it seemed like he did do it, I was still really interested to see this movie because I knew of this Nat Turner story since I was in third grade. And I remember thinking in third grade as a movie lover, this should be a movie. This would be an incredible kick-ass movie. And so I watched the movie, and it was great. It was fantastic. I mean, it had the attitude of like the early Spike Lee movies, like even the amateurish flourishes made it better. It had such vision and such attitude and such grit. I loved it. And I started trying to talk to people about it. I would post about it and things like that. Nobody would engage because of him. They would say, how could you speak objectively about this movie given what a monster this guy is? And I said, well, don't forget, this was summer of 2016. Bitter Bernie bro that I was, I said, well, if you don't want to watch this movie because he was accused of rape, then tell me who you're voting for in a couple months, because your two choices that this country propped up are an accused rapist himself and the wife of a rapist whose job on his presidential campaigns was to silence the women who said that he raped them. So if you got a problem with watching a movie, I want you to explain to me how this country has elevated these two degenerate scumbags, right? And which one you're going to vote for in a couple of months. So don't give me shit about a movie. But people did, and they thought it was in poor taste for me to like praise the movie independent of the person. So that informed my decision. I was like, it would just be weird if I reviewed the movie without at least making reference to these allegations. Now, in terms of the allegations themselves, I want people to realize we've been doing this show in some form for almost 4 years now. We haven't been on YouTube for that long, but we started with an audio show. Over the time that we've been doing this show, there have been a lot of Me Too things come out, right? There have been a lot of allegations come out against a lot of people in the 4 years we've done this show. You guys don't hear the stuff that we don't chime in on because we don't chime in on them. And so I am not a knee-jerk, believe all women, no matter what, pile on somebody and ruin their life when something comes out against them. Over the course of the day, and by the way, I do talk about documentation. I have documentation to prove this to you, Russell, that I texted you, I think it was Sunday night, because I watched this movie on Sunday night based on Tusker's super chat, actually. He put it on my radar. I never even heard of it until then. I watched it that night. Right. I messaged you, Russell, that night. The movie sucks. That was before I knew the allegations. Yeah. And then the next day that wasn't you. Right. The next day I texted you, oh, look, turns out there are these things that have come out again on this guy, right?
No, but anyway, that was not what defined your review.
Right. It wasn't what defined it. But the reason I felt the need to address it is partly, like I said, just because I felt it would be weird if I didn't. But also, I didn't want to address it in a disingenuous way and say, well, it's 50-50. Because based on the evidence that I had researched that entire day, it was not 50-50. These allegations seem very credible. There are multiple women with similar stories. Yep. And there's documentation that they've been making these accusations for a long time. There are text messages between a couple of these women and Tim Heidecker, who I guess produced the film, dated August 2021, saying that, hey, we've been reaching out to you to warn you that, this guy has done these things to us, so maybe you shouldn't work with him. That was August 2021. So it's not like they threw this together at the last minute when he got famous in order to take him down. I would not comment on something like that if I didn't think that they were credible. And I think as much as we should, I'm not for believe. I don't believe that you should believe all women, no matter what. I think you should take all women seriously who come forward and believe the ones who you think have a credible case after you look at the case. Take it on a case-by-case basis. But there were some people, and not many people had this criticism. There were some people who just came out and just knee-jerk said, well, these allegations are not credible. Yeah. And what I would say to that is, if you don't think these women are credible, then your motto is really believe no women. Because if these allegations are not credible, I don't know what could be. So anyway, that's that. That's why I addressed it in that way. In retrospect, I probably should have just made them separate videos.
Right. Okay, so as I said when we said we were going to talk about this, I'm not questioning the allegations. I took a look at them too. They seem credible to me, and I'm certainly not somebody with a knee-jerk reaction to these kinds of accusations. What I did realize from some of the comments is you do have a lot of young bloods watching the show who are coming up in a very confusing time, and I think it can be difficult for them to separate out the feeling that as men, they are under assault. I feel that's a valid feeling. And I think it's hard for them to separate that from just weighing out these kinds of accusations rather than to have a knee-jerk reaction against them. I think that's a lot of them probably want to go to the other extreme. Now, I understand that you're coming up in a really shitty time. I think I've said this on the show before. When I was a kid, a kind of cliche was you'd have an old person would start talking to you. Oh, God, if I wish I were your age now with all the technology. It's amazing. What an amazing time to be young. Nobody says that shit to young people anymore. What you say to them is like, thank God, better you than me, motherfucker. Thank God I'm not coming up now. I get it. It's a hard world. It's very confusing. You know, you can't be a boy or a man without being accused of toxic masculinity. Shit, man, trying to figure out it. It's nerve-wracking enough going in for that first kiss. To try to go in for that first kiss in a world where it's really up to the person to decide whether that gesture constituted assault or not, depending on how they felt about it.
Of course.
Shit, man, I'd be home jacking off playing my Xbox too. Like, I get it. Why?
Yeah, the big romance moments in movies where a woman is talking and a guy shuts her up and he kisses her, right? The only thing separating that from a sexual assault is whether or not she wants it.
It's up to her interpretation.
Right. If she kisses him back, it's a romantic moment. If she says, oh my God, how could you? Then that's an assault, right?
It was so nerve-wracking trying to figure out those signals. Right. When you're a teenager, when you're first trying to figure that out, oh my God. I mean, of course, the rate at which adolescents are having sex is plummeting. Of course it is. I can't even imagine having that extra pressure added, because part of the fear is actually, even back then when it was acceptable to make a pass, you're terrified that she's going to slap you and call you a little pervert or something, you know, like that you misread all the signals and you're going to be hated. So all of that to say, I get it, man. I get where you kids are coming from, and I feel bad that you're coming up in a world like that. At the same time, there's the side of it you have to understand. Movements like Me Too were not addressing a non-existent problem. Yes, in the world that I came up in, men and boys were able to get away with behavior that they should not have been able to get away with, particularly in the entertainment industry where that really burgeoned. I'll give you an example. Joe Esterhaus, the guy who wrote Showgirls and Basic Instinct, terrible screenwriter, actually wrote a great memoir. And in the memoir, he's celebrating Bob Evans, who was this legendary producer, the guy who produced The Godfather and Love Story and Rosemary's Baby. And, you know, he was a very typical Hollywood guy of his time. And he's talking about, I hope I don't offend anybody here, but this is in the book. He talks about how Bob Evans was so wired and he was such a crazy guy that he sent a beautiful woman to his hotel room to pull an invitation to a party out of her vagina and hand it to him. Now, if you put that in a memoir now in a laudatory way, we'll be like, what the fuck is wrong with you?
Right.
And you know what? That's as it should be. That should not have been celebrated. That person was a human being that he did that to. Comedy Central did a cartoon about him at one point. And that was part of what was celebrated about him, that he was this guy behaving like that. So what I would say to people who, on the one hand, you know, particularly young men, because that was a lot of where I saw this, that it really caught my attention. Yes, on the one hand, the backlash has been very hard on that generation of boys and men, and it has created a world that's very difficult for them to negotiate. And I understand that. But you also have to understand that these movements didn't come out of nowhere, and they were not something that were not addressing a real and legitimate problem. So when accusations like this come up, just like it's wrong to be knee-jerk and support them, believe all women, I don't buy that. I've known women who lied. Okay, it's not common. It's not common. It's not most, but it does happen. And when you create a believe all women standard, yeah, you wind up violating the principle we've always gone by in jurisprudence: better that 10 guilty men go free than that one innocent man hang. Yeah, if you create a believe all women standard, you're going to hang a lot of innocent people, men and women, because there are people like that. It's not most people, but some people are like that. But you cannot, in your anger, go to the other extreme where the evidence here, and listen, it would probably be better if we didn't live in a world where a bunch of schmucks are sitting there trying to parse out the evidence of sexual assault on YouTube and on Twitter. What business is it of ours? What are we, legal experts? We're forensic examiners. We're able to weigh out the evidence. We're all brilliant legal minds here. And again, I guess it's no worse than a jury of your peers. And also something that you do have to remember is part of the reason the trial by Twitter, as much as I am against it, because I feel it does do a lot of harm and it does make it really violate the de facto rights of the accused by creating a situation where they don't get to defend themselves. They're going to lose their profession. They're going to lose everything, and they don't have the right to a trial that way. It really is mob justice. At the same time, I do understand why it happened, because these kinds of allegations are so difficult to prove very often, and they're so rarely successfully prosecuted, that eventually people felt like they had to take it into their own hands. So that's where it's coming from. I'm not saying it's a good solution. I'm very much against it. But I think, especially for a lot of the young men coming up in a world like that, and young boys, when you feel like you're under assault, you don't look at the other side. And there's a reason all of this came about. So if you look at the evidence, which again, like I said, it's very problematic that everyone got turned into judge, jury, and executioner. But it is what it is. If you look at the evidence, yes, it looks like these accusations are credible. Is he guilty of crimes? I mean, not by the laws that we have.
It doesn't seem that way based on what we know.
Based on the evidence. It looks like he's a sex pest. He's a sex pest. You know, and also it looks like his signature move is to claim that he had a falling out with his crew. And can I come crash with you? Because look, man, this guy has 2 million subscribers. He doesn't need to crash with anybody. He could go stay at the Four Seasons wherever he is.
You make up some bullshit story to get into the girl's house. She tells you, okay, fine, but we're not hooking up. Then you go into her bed. I mean, come on. And Ethan Klein confirmed this on YouTube, that he spoke to Andrew Callaghan, who apparently checked himself into a mental rehab center of some kind, and Ethan said on YouTube that he talked to him and that the guy confirmed that these things actually happened. Now, it's probably a matter of interpretation. Andrew might not feel like he crossed the line. They feel like he did, but he did not deny the stories. Right. And so it would be disingenuous of me to just mention that in passing and say, well, we don't know. Right. You know what I mean? Because I looked into it over the course of the day, and it would be disrespectful to those women who came forward to just say, well, it's 50-50, because it's not 50-50.
Right.
Please clap.